Hi, my name is Lydia Harris. The first thing I saw when I woke up was a ceiling the color of chalk, lit by harsh fluorescent panels that made my eyes water. My chest ached like it had been split open, each breath catching on sharp edges. A rhythmic beeping kept time with the pounding in my skull. A surgeon appeared in my peripheral vision, tall, dark hair tucked under a cap, voice clipped and urgent. "You've lost a dangerous amount of blood. We need to get you into surgery now, but you can't sign for yourself. We'll need a family member." Family. The word hit me harder than the crash that had put me here. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, my nails still caked with grit from the asphalt. First I called my mother. Voicemail. Then my father. No answer. My older sister Samantha. Nothing. I tried my mother again. This time, she picked up. "Mom," I croaked, my throat raw. "I'm in the hospital. Car accident. They need you to sign—" She cut me off mid-sentence, her tone more irritated than alarmed. "Can't come. It's Samantha's company anniversary tonight. Call your Uncle Frank." 7 words. No pause. No, "Are you all right?" No, "We'll be there soon." Just a casual dismissal, as if my life were a minor inconvenience compared to Samantha's big night. The surgeon kept talking, but his words faded under the roar in my ears. My stomach twisted. I'd always known my parents had their favorites, but I never thought I'd hear the proof while lying in an ICU bed. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know something. What time is it where you are and where are you listening from? Leave it in the comments. I read them all. Because what happened after this, even I didn't see it coming. It was one of those early March nights in Baltimore when the cold isn't just cold. It slices right through you. The streets were slick from a freezing drizzle that had turned to thin sheets of ice. Street lamps threw pale halos onto the wet pavement, and the wind smelled faintly of the harbor. I just finished a double shift at the design firm, my brain still buzzing with floor plans and deadlines. My phone buzzed. A friend inviting me to a wine bar downtown. Tempting, but I was exhausted. All I wanted was to get home, heat up leftover soup, and call my daughter before bedtime. Crossing the city bridge, I kept both hands steady on the wheel. The radio played low, an old James Taylor song that made me think of summers before life got complicated. I glanced at the skyline, the domino sugar sign glowing faintly in the distance. Then it happened. A semi up ahead jackknifed without warning, blocking 2 lanes. There's a split second when disaster becomes inevitable. Your brain registers it, but your body can't react fast enough. The truck's taillights swung sideways, sparks flying as metal screamed against asphalt. My tires hit an invisible patch of ice. The steering wheel wrenched violently. The sound of shattering glass filled the air, followed by a crushing blow as my chest slammed into the seatbelt. For a moment, my vision turned white, then black, then came back in fragments. The acrid smell of gasoline, distant shouts, the bitter cold rushing in as strangers pried open the door. A paramedic leaned over me, his voice firm but kind. "Stay with me, Lydia. You're going to be okay." I wanted to believe him, but as they slid me onto the stretcher, my mind betrayed me with memories. 13th birthdays celebrated alone, the mortgage payments I'd covered when my parents were behind, Samantha laughing about me being the dependable one, like it was some cosmic joke. Inside the ambulance, the siren's wail wasn't just noise. It was the soundtrack to every moment I'd been reliable yet invisible. By the time we reached the hospital, fluorescent lights spun overhead. The nurse's voice broke through the haze. "Who can we call to sign consent?" I fumbled for my phone, dialing out of habit. "Mom," 1 ring. "Lydia," she answered. "Mom, it's bad. They need you to—" She sighed, as though I'd interrupted something important. "Can't come. It's Samantha's company anniversary. Call your Uncle Frank." The line went dead. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. My heart monitor sped up. the pain in my chest twisting into something darker. A nurse touched my arm gently. "Do you want us to call your uncle?" I nodded, too tired to fight. Somewhere in the haze, my fingers found the cool surface of a brass pocket watch in my bag. Uncle Frank's gift from years ago. He'd given it to me when I was 9, told me, "As long as I'm breathing, you've got someone in your corner." As the anesthesia crept in, I held onto that watch like it was the only anchor left. When I opened my eyes again, the room was dim except for the glow from a monitor. My throat burned, my body ached, but I wasn't alone. Uncle Frank sat slouched in the chair beside my bed, still in his oil-stained work shirt, his big hands wrapped around mine. "You scared the life out of me, kiddo," he said, relief softening his weathered face. I swallowed, my voice barely a whisper. "How long?" "All night. Surgery ended at sunrise. You're tougher than you think." I studied him, the man who taught me to change a tire, who sat through every school play, who drove hours to rescue me when my car broke down. And now, when my parents couldn't be bothered, he was here. Did they call?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Hospital reached out. Your folks said they had other commitments." Other commitments, Samantha's party, my life versus her celebration. Frank squeezed my hand. "If I hadn't signed, we might be having a different conversation right now." His words sank deep. My parents hadn't just failed to show up. They'd chosen not to be responsible for whether I lived or died. The day after the surgery, the hospital room was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Uncle Frank had dozed off in the chair, his arms crossed, chin dipping toward his chest. I stared at the brass pocket watch he'd left on the nightstand, its slow tick, tick, tick pulling me back, not to the crash, but to something older, something that had been with me long before twisted metal and broken bones. It wasn't the first time my life had been split into before and after. The first time was when I was 8 years old. That winter, Samantha got pneumonia. She was 10 then, older, louder, the kind of kid who could fill a room without even trying. I remember standing in the hallway outside her bedroom, watching my mother fuss over her with hot tea and extra blankets, my father pacing and muttering about medical bills. I'd been sent to the neighbor's house that night. Mrs. Callahan gave me a mug of cocoa and turned on the TV to a flickering episode of Little House on the Prairie. But the thing I remember most wasn't the cocoa or the show. It was the hollow ache in my chest, the kind that comes from realizing that when someone in our family needed care, it was never me. From that winter on, Samantha became the center of gravity in our house. Every conversation orbited her. Her health, her grades, her softball team, her potential. I was the easy one, the independent one, the kid who doesn't need much. At 8 years old, it sounded like a compliment. By 12, I understood it for what it really was, permission for them to forget about me. Birthdays were the worst. I'd blow out candles on a grocery store cake while my parents half-watched from across the room, distracted by Samantha's next tournament or the fact that she wasn't feeling well. Uncle Frank, though, he never missed. He'd show up with a clumsy wrapped box and a grin that said, "I mattered," even if no one else thought so. I thought about that the day I got my first job at the downtown library when I was 16. My parents didn't ask how it went. Samantha had been accepted into some leadership program, and that was the headline in our kitchen. I remember walking upstairs with my paycheck in my hand and wondering if they'd notice if I disappeared for a week. The funny, or maybe tragic something thing about being the dependable one is that it becomes your permanent role whether you choose it or not. I was the one they called when the car broke down, when the rent was overdue, when Dad's back went out, and someone needed to mow the lawn. I answered every call. I told myself it was love, even when it felt more like duty. College wasn't any different. I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover my tuition, still sending money home so my parents wouldn't lose the house. Samantha was focusing on her mental health and taking a lighter course load. Every praise they had was for her. "Look at Samantha," they'd say. "She's really finding her way." Not once did anyone say, "Look at Lydia, she's holding us together." By my late 20s, I was paying more of my parents' bills than they were. I'd helped Samantha out of a failed business venture, covering her credit card debt so it wouldn't ruin her fresh start. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that someday they'd see me as more than the one who bails them out. That someday never came. Back in the hospital bed, I shifted, wincing at the ache in my ribs. Uncle Frank stirred. "You need anything?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. "No," I said, though what I really wanted was an answer to a question I couldn't quite ask. Why am I always the last one they show up for? Frank leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know, kid, not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family." He said it plainly, like it was a truth as obvious as the weather. I'd heard versions of that before, but never from him. Never from the one person who'd never let me down. The words settled into me, heavy but solid. That night, when the nurse dimmed the lights, I lay awake listening to the rain against the window. I thought about the years I'd traded away. The nights I stayed late at work to cover an extra shift so I could help with their mortgage, the vacations I skipped to pay Samantha's car repairs, the way I learned to swallow disappointment so deep it barely even registered anymore. And yet, when I needed them, just once, truly needed them, they had other commitments. I closed my eyes and the scene from earlier replayed, sharp as glass. My mother's voice, flat and unshaken, saying, "Can't come. It's Samantha's company anniversary. Call your Uncle Frank." The first time I understood the real cost of being the good one was in my early 30s. Samantha had wrecked her car, again, and my parents called me from the tow yard. I paid the repair bill without thinking, telling myself it was just another blip, just another family emergency. But that night, as I scrubbed dishes in my quiet apartment, I realized something that chilled me. No one had even said thank you. It wasn't just that they expected my help. It was that they couldn't imagine a world where I'd say no. That's what made the accident hurt in a way that went beyond the broken bones. The crash didn't just break my body. It cracked open the truth I'd been dodging for years. 2 days after the surgery, I managed to walk to the window with Frank's help. The streets below were still slick, the city lights blurred by mist. Frank stood beside me, hands in his pockets. "You ever think maybe they act like this because they know you'll always come through?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I thought about all the times I'd dropped everything to drive across town for them, to wire money I couldn't spare, to rearrange my life so theirs could stay comfortable. "Maybe," I said finally. "But I'm starting to wonder if they think I can take every hit, because I always have." Frank's jaw tightened. "Then maybe it's time to stop proving them right." His words stayed with me long after he left that night. I sat back on the bed, the pocket watch cool in my palm. The steady tick felt like it was counting something down, not to another disaster, but to a decision I knew I'd have to make. And for the first time in years, I felt something under the hurt, under the exhaustion. Resolve. 3 weeks after the crash, I could finally stand on my own 2 feet without feeling like the ground was tilting. My ribs still ached, and every step felt like walking on sore muscles. But I was upright. That morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds of my apartment, laying thin stripes across the living room carpet. The city was quiet, muffled by the rain. I moved slowly, every movement deliberate. On the desk in the corner sat a pile of unopened mail, bills, flyers, insurance statements. I hadn't touched them since I'd come home from the hospital. I was halfway through sorting envelopes when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't decided whether to block: Mom. For a second, I let it ring, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail to pretend I hadn't seen it, but another part, the one that still wanted to know if she had any regret, pressed accept. "Lydia," she began, her voice sticky sweet. the kind of tone she used when she wanted something. "It's so good to finally hear you. We've all been so worried." I didn't respond. "You know we would have been there if we could," she continued quickly, as if speed could erase what she'd done. "But it was Samantha's big night. You understand, don't you?" Her words sliced open the wound all over again. I could hear the clinking of glasses in the background. She wasn't even alone. "I'm tired," I said quietly. "I'll call you later." I ended the call before she could reply. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean. That afternoon, I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were neatly stacked papers, every mortgage payment I'd made on my parents' house, every transfer to cover Samantha's debts, every utility bill I'd paid when they were short, 10 years of proof that I'd been more than the dependable one. I'd been the safety net they didn't even bother to thank. I spread the papers across the desk, the edges curling slightly with age. Frank's words echoed in my head. "Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family." I ran my hand over the documents, feeling the grooves where I'd pressed too hard with a pen, the faint scent of old paper and ink. For years, this had just been a record of sacrifice. But now, it felt like ammunition. By nightfall, the stack was organized into tidy bundles. The rain had stopped, leaving the city wrapped in damp silence. On the desk, Frank's pocket watch ticked steadily. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept turning over the same thought. I'd given them enough, more than enough, and still, they chose a party over my life. The next morning, I made a call. The law office was downtown, tucked between a coffee shop and a pharmacy. The receptionist, a brisk woman with a silver bun, led me to a glass-walled office at the end of the hall. Behind the desk sat Karen Walsh, mid-40s, sharp eyes behind rimless glasses, the kind of presence that filled the room without raising her voice. "Ms. Harris," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Let's see what you've brought me." I placed the heavy folder on her desk. She opened it and began flipping through the pages, her expression unreadable. Mortgage receipts, bank transfers, credit card statements, the years laid out in black and white. After several minutes, she closed the folder. "You've been their financial lifeline," she said matter-of-factly. "They've relied on you for far more than most parents ever should." Her words weren't judgmental, just factual. "And the house?" she asked. "In my name," I said. That seemed to please her. "Good, that gives you full authority. If you want them out, you can issue a 72-hour notice. They'd have no legal defense. If they refuse, we proceed with eviction through the courts. And trust me, public records of parents abandoning their daughter in a hospital bed, that won't play well for them." The thought made my stomach twist. "Does this make me a monster?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. Karen leaned forward. "They made their choice when they left you bleeding in that bed. You're not throwing them out, Lydia. You're reclaiming what's yours." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I scrolled to the message I'd saved. The one burned into my memory. "Can't come. It's Samantha's company anniversary. Call your Uncle Frank." I slid the phone across the desk. Karen read it, her mouth tightening. "That's all the proof you need," she said. Something shifted inside me then. The guilt that had been sitting like a stone in my chest began to dissolve, replaced by something colder, cleaner, clarity. "Drop the papers," I said. Karen smiled faintly. "Consider it done." When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the late afternoon air felt sharper, cleaner. The city's hum seemed distant, almost muted. In my coat pocket, the pocket watch ticked, not counting down to another demand from my family, but to the moment I'd finally stop letting them decide my worth. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the eviction notice freshly printed and resting beside my coffee mug. I stared at it for a long time, Not because I doubted my decision, but because I knew what would come next. The storm. And for once, I was ready for it. 2 evenings later, the storm arrived. My building's doorman called up to say there were 3 people in the lobby insisting they were family. My stomach tightened. I didn't need to ask who. "Let them up," I said. Moments later, there was a knock. Sharp. Impatient. Before I could open the door, it swung inward. My father, face flushed, shoulders squared. My mother already in tears. Samantha trailing behind with that smirk I'd seen too many times, the one that said she was sure she'd win. "This nonsense ends now," my father barked. "Tell me you're not going through with this." Samantha laughed, a short, mocking sound. "All this because you didn't get enough attention? Grow up, Lydia. You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't answer. I walked past them into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and set it on the coffee table before sitting down. My silence made them uneasy. "Lydia, please," my mother said, clutching her chest. "We raised you. You can't just throw us out like strangers." Samantha stepped closer, leaning over the table. "Retract it," she hissed. "Do it now or I'll ruin you. Everyone will know you abandoned your parents. You'll be the monster, not us." The words stung. Not because they were true, but because I'd feared them for years. I reached for the pocket watch, clicking it open and shut. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family. Frank's voice was as clear as if he were in the room. When I looked up, my voice was steady. "I already regret giving you everything and getting nothing back." My father's jaw tightened. Samantha's smirk faltered. I stood and walked to the refrigerator, tapping the eviction notice taped neatly to the door. "You've got 48 hours, I said. "Use them wisely." The silence that followed wasn't the heavy kind that begged to be broken. It was the burning kind that leaves marks. Finally, my father muttered something under his breath and headed for the hallway. My mother clung to his arm, still crying. Samantha lingered, her eyes hard. Resentment, maybe fear. When the door clicked shut behind them, I sat back down, lifted my glass of water, and took a slow sip. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. The morning after the confrontation, I woke with that strange, restless feeling, like the air before a thunderstorm. The apartment was still, the city hum faint beyond my windows. For the first time in weeks, my body didn't ache quite as much, but my mind was already bracing for whatever came next. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Clara, my assistant at the design firm. Her voice was thin, uneasy. "Lydia, you need to see this." She texted me a link. I tapped it open, and there it was. A Facebook video, already with tens of thousands of views. The frame was shaky, but I recognized the living room instantly. My parents' house. In the shot, my mother sat on the floor, tears streaking her cheeks, surrounded by half-packed boxes. My father's arm was around her shoulders, his expression grim. The voice behind the camera was unmistakable. "Samantha, this," she said, "is what our sister did to us. She's throwing our parents out of their own home. After everything they've done for her, she's leaving them with nowhere to go." My mother looked into the camera, her voice trembling. "We never thought she'd do this to her own family." The comments scrolled along the side of the video, hundreds of strangers calling me heartless, selfish, cruel. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just that they'd twisted the truth. It was that they'd done it so quickly, so effortlessly, like they'd been waiting for this moment all along. Clara's voice broke through my haze. "Lydia, your boss saw it. He wants to talk to you. Now." The office felt colder than usual when I walked in. People glanced away as I passed. Some whispered. My boss, Mr. Hanover, sat behind his desk, hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Lydia," he began carefully, "we've had over 200 emails since this morning. Clients are threatening to pull their accounts if your name stays attached to ours. They don't want the publicity." I shook my head. You can't possibly believe. He raised a hand. It's not about what I believe. It's about perception. I think it's best if you take a leave of absence until this blows over. The words hit harder than I expected. A leave of absence. The polite version of being pushed out the door. I nodded, too tired to argue. By the time I got home, the video had racked up even more views. My phone buzzed with messages. Some from friends defending me, most from strangers hurling insults. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, replaying my parents' staged misery, Samantha's voice dripping with false outrage. Was this it? Was this how they'd finally erase me? Not by forgetting me, but by rewriting the story so I was the villain? My eyes drifted to the coffee table, to the brass pocket watch Frank had given me. I picked it up, feeling its steady tick against my palm. The sound grounded me, pulled me back from the spiral. Hours later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Mia, the teenage girl from down the hall. Her eyes were red, her sweater sleeves pushed over her hands. I overheard them, she said quickly. Your parents. They were in the lobby earlier. They said you don't deserve family, but I just wanted you to know you're not what they say. You helped me with my scholarship forms, remember? If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have even applied. Her words hit deeper than she could have known. I saw myself in her, the younger version of me who thought being useful was the only way to be worth keeping around. I put a hand on her shoulder. Thank you, Mia. That means more than you know. When she left, I closed the door slowly and leaned against it. Something shifted inside me. If Samantha wanted a war, fine. But this time, I wasn't going to play by her rules. I pulled my laptop closer and began to gather everything. Not just the receipts from the folder, but digital proof. Screenshots of bank transfers, email confirmations for bills I'd paid, even copies of the mortgage documents with my name on them. Every sacrifice, every favor I'd done for them, laid out like evidence. The ticking of the pocket watch grew louder in the quiet room. By midnight, I had a digital file thick enough to crush their story. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something besides anger or exhaustion, control. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on a hard wooden bench inside the Baltimore City Circuit Court. The room was crowded. Reporters along the back wall, distant relatives leaning forward to watch, strangers who'd wandered in just for the drama. Across the aisle, Samantha sat in a tailored blazer, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone as though the outcome were already written in her favor. My parents sat beside her, their faces arranged into careful masks of wounded dignity. When the bailiff called the room to order, Samantha's lawyer rose first. His voice was smooth, almost oily. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, pacing slowly, we are here today because a daughter decided her aging parents were a burden to be discarded. Instead of gratitude for all they've done, she served them eviction papers, cold, heartless, unforgivable. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. Let them talk, I told myself. The truth is coming. When it was our turn, Karen stood. No theatrics, no raised voice. She simply began placing documents onto the evidence table. Over the past decade, she said, my client has paid more than $400,000 of her family's expenses. Mortgage, utilities, medical bills, credit card debt, even business losses for her sister Samantha. She paused, letting the words sink in. And when my client lay in an ICU bed after a car accident, unable to sign for her own surgery, her family's response was... Karen gestured to the clerk. The projector flickered on, and then the words appeared larger than life on the screen. Can't come. It's Samantha's company anniversary. Call your Uncle Frank. Gasps filled the room. I heard someone in the back whisper, Oh my God! Even Samantha's smirk faltered for a second. Karen let the silence stretch. No visit, no call, just 7 words to remind her that her life mattered less than a party. The judge leaned forward. Is this authentic? Samantha's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. Answer the question. Samantha shifted in her seat. Yes, but you have to understand. Karen interrupted smoothly. Did you confirm her injuries were minor before you posted your viral video painting her as a monster? No, Samantha muttered. The jury's eyes hardened. Karen turned back to them. This is not about a daughter turning her back on her parents. This is about a family turning their back on her, time and time again, until she had no choice but to protect herself. She chose survival over continued exploitation, and that is not cruelty. That is courage. The deliberation took less than an hour. When the jury returned, the foreman read the verdict. We find in favor of the plaintiff. A ripple of relief swept through me so strong it almost made me dizzy. Karen put a hand on my shoulder. You did it. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out Frank's watch, and clicked it shut with a soft snap. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about ending the cycle. 2 months after the verdict, my home finally felt like it belonged to me again. Not just the walls or the furniture, but the air itself. Quiet, unburdened. Mornings were different now. I'd wake to the soft hum of the city outside, brew a cup of coffee, and sit by the window watching the light crawl across the floor. There was no knot in my stomach wondering what crisis would land on my doorstep next. No phone buzzing with a favor disguised as an emergency. The newspapers had run their stories. The text message, can't come. It's Samantha's company anniversary. Call your Uncle Frank, had been plastered across headlines, dissected on talk shows, and replayed in endless online debates. Whatever public sympathy Samantha thought she'd win, it had burned away in the spotlight. Her video campaign backfired spectacularly. People who had once filled the comments with praise for her now unfollowed in droves. The business contacts she'd bragged about cut ties quietly. My parents faded too, slipping into the background. Word was they were staying with a cousin somewhere in West Virginia, far enough away to be forgotten, close enough that the absence still hummed like a faint echo. One morning in late May, I was watering the small patch of soil I called a garden, a messy blend of marigolds, basil, and whatever my daughter, Ella, had planted just to see what happens. The sun was warm on my shoulders, the kind of spring warmth that carries no promise of a storm. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. I hope you're happy. We lost everything because of you. I stared at the screen for a long moment. In another life, I might have typed back paragraphs, defending myself, explaining again, trying to find the one sentence that would make her understand. Instead, I pressed delete. No reply. For years, I'd begged for even scraps of approval. Now, her words no longer had weight. That afternoon, Ella and I knelt in the dirt, our hands stained with soil. She was planting lavender this time, humming softly to herself. At one point, she paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Mom, she asked quietly, does this mean it's just us now? I smiled, tucking the hair behind her ear. Just us. And we're going to build something better. Her smile was small but sure, and in it I saw everything I needed to keep going. That night, after dinner, with dishes stacked neatly by the sink, I sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room. The paperwork for the Mount Vernon rental house lay in front of me. Finalized lease agreements, the ink still fresh. The first deposit was already in my account. I logged into my bank app and without hesitation transferred the money directly into Ella's college fund. Watching the numbers shift on the screen, I felt a satisfaction that was deeper than any courtroom victory. On the table beside me, Frank's pocket watch glinted under the lamplight. I picked it up, winding it slowly. The tick no longer felt like a countdown to disappointment. It was steady, certain, a rhythm of survival. You were right, Frank, I whispered. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family. In the months that followed, I learned that freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like small, ordinary moments without fear, reading in bed without dreading a late-night phone call, eating breakfast without the weight of someone else's debts pressing on my chest. Sometimes I'd catch myself waiting for the next shoe to drop. That's what years of being the dependable one does. It teaches you to anticipate the crisis before it arrives. But then Ella would call from the kitchen, asking if I wanted tea, and the tension would ease. We were building something. It might be fragile, it might be messy, but it was ours. One evening in early summer, I sat on the back step watching Ella chase fireflies across the yard. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the air warm but not heavy. I thought about the years I'd lost, the ones spent trying to prove I was worth loving, the ones spent holding together a family that never once turned to see who was carrying them. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They'd taken my love for granted. And in the end, I'd learned that silence could be power. Not the kind that crushes, but the kind that frees. I had chosen myself. And it was enough. Later that night, after Ella had gone to bed, I walked quietly to her room. She was already asleep, her hair fanned across the pillow, the faint rise and fall of her breath steady and calm. I stood there for a moment, memorizing it. The peace I'd fought for, the proof that all the pain had been worth something. I turned back to my own room, the pocket watch in my hand. The brass was warm from my touch, the ticking soft but certain. Some people measure life in years. I'd started measuring it in moments of peace, and for the first time in decades, I could count more than a few. By autumn, the heat of summer had softened into crisp mornings and early sunsets. The garden out back had gone wild, marigolds blooming past their season, lavender pushing through the edges of the fence. I didn't mind. Chaos in the soil felt different than chaos in life. It was growth, not destruction. Life had fallen into a rhythm. Ella and I had our little routines: weekend farmers markets, movie nights with too much popcorn, and Sunday mornings spent walking along the harbor with hot coffee in hand. For the first time in years, my calendar wasn't a minefield of urgent calls from my parents or last-minute rescues for Samantha. There were still echoes, though. Sometimes I'd catch sight of a certain street corner and remember driving across town at midnight to cover one of their messes. Or I'd hear a song that played the night of the accident and feel the phantom ache in my ribs. But the memories didn't have the same pull. They didn't own me anymore. One Saturday in late October, I decided to drive out to Frank's garage. He'd been calling every couple of weeks to check in, but I hadn't seen him in person since the trial ended. When I pulled up, he was out front wiping grease from his hands with an old rag, the same way he had when I was a kid. "Well, if it isn't the toughest kid in Baltimore," he said, his face creasing into a smile. I hugged him, holding on longer than I meant to. "I brought you something," I said, pulling a paper bag from the car. Inside were cinnamon rolls from his favorite bakery. We sat in the back office, the smell of motor oil and fresh bread mingling in the air. Over coffee, I told him about the garden, about Ella's new obsession with photography, about the way the house felt lighter now. "You look different," he said finally. "Not tired for once." "I am tired," I admitted, "but it's a good kind of tired. The kind you get from building, not fixing." He nodded. "That's the difference. Building is yours. Fixing is theirs." Before I left, I pulled the brass pocket watch from my coat and placed it on the desk between us. "You gave this to me when I was 9, I said. "I think it's time it came home." Frank shook his head, sliding it back toward me. "Number, that's yours. Always has been. Just promise me you'll keep it ticking." I smiled, tucking it back into my pocket. "I will." The drive back felt shorter than usual. The trees lining the road were ablaze with orange and gold, their leaves scattering across the pavement. For the first time, I wasn't replaying old conversations in my head, rewriting them to get the ending I wanted. I'd stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. At home, Ella was sitting on the porch steps, camera in hand, trying to catch a photo of a squirrel raiding our bird feeder. She looked up when she heard the car. "Did you see Uncle Frank?" she asked. "Yeah, he's doing well." She nodded, then glanced at the watch chain peeking from my pocket. "You carry that everywhere." "I do," I said. "It reminds me of what matters." That night, as we cooked dinner together, I thought about how different things were now. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but solid. Ours. The kind of life I'd once thought was reserved for other people. There were no more sudden demands to wire money, no guilt trips about not showing up for Samantha, no careful calculations about how much of myself I could give away before I disappeared completely. I'd drawn the line, and despite the noise and the fallout, it had held. Still, every now and then, the past would knock. One evening in November, a letter arrived with no return address. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. It was short, just a few lines from my mother. "We're doing fine. Don't worry about us. Maybe someday we can talk." I read it twice, then set it on the counter. There was a time I would have clung to those words, searching for meaning between the lines, convincing myself they were an opening. Now they were just ink on paper. That night, I burned the letter in the fireplace. Ella watched from the couch, silent but understanding. By winter, the garden had gone to sleep under a layer of frost. I found myself spending more evenings at the desk, going through photos Ella had taken. The harbor at dawn, the neighborhood kids riding bikes, the marigolds from our backyard. In each picture, there was a quietness, a steadiness I hadn't realized we'd captured. One evening, as snow began to fall, I sat back in my chair, the pocket watch warm in my hand. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to be indispensable to people who saw me only as a resource, about the accident that had forced everything into the open, about Frank's words. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family. He'd been right. But I'd learned something else, too. Sometimes the family you choose is just one person who shows up over and over until you finally believe you're worth showing up for. On New Year's Eve, Ella and I stood on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, watching fireworks bloom over the city. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "This was a good year," she said. I thought about everything that had happened, the accident, the trial, the silence afterward, and realized she was right. It had been a good year, not because it was easy, but because it was ours. "Yeah," I said, squeezing her hand. "It was." The fireworks crackled in the distance, their reflections catching in the brass of the pocket watch when I glanced down. The ticking was steady, almost in time with my heartbeat, and in that moment I knew the truth I wanted to carry into the next year. I had stopped living for the approval of people who would never give it. I had chosen peace over chaos, self-respect over obligation, and I would keep choosing it every single day. In the end, this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. I learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when it matters most. Today, my home is peaceful, my heart lighter, and my future clearer. If you've ever felt invisible or taken for granted, know this: you have the right to choose yourself. We only get one life, and it's never too late to protect your peace. Choose you, because you're worth it. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you matter, and your love leaves a mark.